Hey everybody, I wanted to try and show something I find pretty useful in a lot of the projects that I use. This is something that really comes into play when you've got a lot of interactable objects, something that you're setting up on a regular basis, especially when you're dealing with triggers and having the player walk through triggers to interact with something. If you haven't tried this before, you should really look into making macro libraries. There's something super useful. Gives you access to various macros that you use a lot in across a lot of different blueprints instead of having to recreate them within each different blueprint. You can create one by going under the blueprints section when you create a new object and go to blueprint macro library. I choose actor because I think that gives you more access to all the different things that Blueprint has. You could potentially, I haven't dug into this a ton, but I think you could choose one of these others if you wanted to make a particular macro library for a bunch of things that interact with the character or the player controller. I just choose actor because it's the base class for everything, and then just call it macro library. And then what you're going to do is open this up, and this is going to give you a blank node graph here and a list of macros that you've created. So it starts you with one just kind of blank, and the one I want to talk about today is called, I call it the PlayerCheck. It's pretty simple. It's pretty much anytime you're gonna want to check to see if the actor that you're messing around or that you're interacting with is actually the player. So I'm going to add three execution pins, two at the start and one at two at the end and one at the start. So I call this one in, and then since we're checking for the player, we're going to do player and not player is what I do. You can call them whatever you want, but this makes sense for the way I set it up. And then on the input, we're also going to have an actor coming in, and we want that to be an actor. Where's my actor? There he is. Actor object reference, and then we're going to add another one of those down here, and that's going to be your player character. I'm going to spell that right, actor. And the last one over here is going to be a player controller. And we're going to look for player controller. Oops. And that's going to be another object reference there. So very simply, we're going to get player controller, and that one's just going to plug in here. And then we're going to get a player character, and we're going to compare these two. So drag over, hit equal, and what we're going to do is we're going to look to see if the actor that's coming in here, is it the player character. If you hold down B and click, that's going to give you a branch, and we're going to check this. And if it is the player character, then we're going to say that's true, and that is the player. And if it's false, it's going to be the not player. So that is my simple macro, and now I can show you how that's used. So we're going to do something pretty simple here. New blueprint class, do actor again, and we're just going to make a generic button type of object. It's not really going to be a button, but it'll work that way. In the components, we're going to add a static mesh, and that's fine for the name. And then we're going to add a box collision and box. And this is going to be our trigger. I'm going to set this to 100 by 100 by 100, and then my static mesh is just going to be the cube that comes with the generic starter content. So now that we've got that, I don't need any of this. What we're going to do is we're going to take the box collision, and we're going to do begin overlap and end overlap. And what this is going to do is anytime something crosses that this trigger, which will be invisible when you put it into the level, what we're going to do is we're going to do our player check macro. So this is, as you saw, this was created over here as a separate piece, and now in any of my blueprints, I can call that macro. So anywhere where I want to check if the actor I'm working with is the player, this is where I would do it. So on this trigger, we're going to take the other actor, so that means the thing that it's interacting with, and we're going to plug it into there. And now we know that that's going to come in here. We're going to check it against the player character. If it's true, it's the player. If it's not the player. And then that gives us, so all that stuff comes out over here. So what we want to do in this case is enable input on if it is the player, and the player controller is going to plug into there because that's required to know which player it is that we're talking to. I can't speak for the multiplayer side of this. There's probably some extra steps to that, but for a single player game, this works perfectly well. And then we're going to do the same thing down here, and when the player steps out, we want to actually disable the input on that, and it's the same thing with the controller. So that's very simple setup, and so what we can do to test this is input X. So when I press X, it's going to print, we're just going to print hello because that's super simple. So what's going to happen is when we cross, if the player crosses over this this trigger, it's going to enable input. So pressing X will say hello or print hello, and if the player leaves, it will disable that input. So this will no longer work. So if we go to our level and we put the button in here, maybe pop that up a little bit, and then hit play. If I hit X, nothing's happening. I walk in here inside that trigger, I hit X, and it's saying hello. I walk out, hit X, it doesn't say hello. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I think the nice thing about this is it takes all of this stuff that kind of can start to expand and add a bunch of stuff, compiles it down, or compacts it down to this one nice little node. And it has everything there, and you can call that from any blueprint. So I could create 10 different doors or interactable objects or pickups or whatever, and I could use that macro in all of them, and it'll always work. The other really nice thing about using a macro library like that is if I decide that on a regular basis I'm also pulling out some other information that I'm constantly using next, I can add this to this macro and it updates all of these automatically. So you only have to change it in one place. You don't have to do it in every blueprint that you're working with. So I don't know, something I find really useful that maybe you'll find useful as well. Enjoy.